Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Just Talking About Jesus. I have Margaret Eklund with me today. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you.
Margaret was a friend of my daughter, Sydney's, who is now Sister Mercy, that you might have heard her episode of in her parish in Portland. And so we've been acquainted a little bit together, and she had in common with Sydney as being a nurse, but you have retired now.
I have.
Have you had to adjust to retirement, or was it an easy change?
I honestly didn't think that it was going to be this way, that I could say to you, I loved what I did, absolutely loved what I did for 48 years as a nurse. But I feel like that's a chapter that I can look on with pride. And I'm really grateful for the chapter I'm in now of retirement. And I feel amazing peace. And I'm able to say to people when they say, do you miss it? Yeah, there's aspects I miss, but I really don't miss it. And sometimes I feel guilty saying that. But I'm just so grateful that God's put peace in my heart and so many opportunities to contribute, not as Margaret the nurse, but as Margaret the parishioner, Margaret the mother, Margaret the grandmother. And I'm just so grateful.
Yeah, all these kind of labels that we have for ourselves. But it's kind of the Margaret of everything that God wants you to do at the time, right?
Yes, yes.
What have you found more time to do?
Honestly, being at peace and not having my schedule dictated by the email I might be missing or the quality report that I need to catch up on, or is there a text from a question from a team member at work, to really being present. So I think that's what I've been finding more, is just being able to be more present. And I've worked hard at that, because that's multitasking has been my role. My role the last 10 years at Legacy was being a clinical nurse specialist, and that's kind of being everything to everybody. And so then when I was doing volunteer work at church, or being a grandma, or out hiking, there was always that step of, what else am I missing, or does somebody else need me? And so this has been the piece of really being more present.
Hmm hmm And you have a gift of giving.
Well, thank you. I think it's a gift that God's given, and I'm glad to be able to give it to others and give
Mhm.
that joy.
Yeah. What does bring you the greatest joy?
That's a great question. I think my joy is for the light of my faith and the light of hope, and bringing it to others, people who are either away from the faith, or people who are going through trials and tribulations, um, and bringing it to my grandchildren to help bring the light of faith through their lives and my family.
What is it the thing, if you could narrow down to just one or two things, where do you think God has been with you the most? In what situations or things where you've really, really latched on to Him?
Well, I think the death of my parents. My parents died within 16 hours of each other in 2008. And so that really brought God very much front and center for the how do we move on? And while it was a blessing, my mother passed away of lung cancer that had metastasized. And so she had been on hospice and declining. And so it was an expected end of life journey. For my father, they had been married 62 years, and he was doing relatively well at the beginning part of her decline, but then day by day, he had every little sign of, a little bit more decline. And so when mom passed away at 1 o'clock on a Sunday, we were quite shocked to have the nursing supervisor of the facility they were at. They actually were in the same room. We were very blessed by that care. So when she called to say at 5 o'clock, your father's passed away, we know dad followed her with a broken heart. And
Mhm.
so again, it was an unplanned two deaths. And so it brought my sister and I closer together, and certainly closer in our faith with our families. as far as what are the next steps and how do we heal. And we're again grateful that they were together and grateful that they were with God, but the amount of, you know, grief and then the amount of work that was needed then to follow up with all the things that needed to be followed up with. I think the other place that God was close was when we made the decision to move to Portland from Rochester, New York. So we moved 3,000 miles from a home we had known to very much an unknown, but we wanted to, my husband was gifted with unplanned early retirement from Kodak. And we had our first grandchild born in 2015. And so the combination was, well, do we have the courage and do we have God's grace? And so God was with us as we sold a house of 34 years, bought a house in an area we really weren't familiar with, me finding a new position, and then the new position for my husband being the nanny for our grandchildren. And the gift of the grace is that we've been part of our daughter and son-in-law's life, as well as our two grandchildren that are now 10 and 8. So this was actually 10 years ago this week that we arrived in Portland. But that making the decision to make the change, but then also the immense amount that needed to be done in a few months to be able to get to the West Coast was really relying on so many blessings that came our way with making the decision to say yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I had just finished writing a Bible study, and the gist of it is it's called Discovering Your Journey. And but part of it, you're mapping out your things of your life that because of this happened, resulting in, and then kind of the circular pattern of that. And it's and then going in to compare the same way to like Ruth and Joseph, Jonah, and David. But it's just interesting that, you know, if he hadn't lost his job or you didn't have, you know, that situational thing to motivate you to being, but what a joy. God saw the
Right.
beginning to the end, you know, he knows the beginning from the end. And
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
saw what joy it would be to have you in your grandchildren's lives and back, you
Yeah.
know, reciprocal with that too.
Absolutely. And being able to be exposed to this new faith community, which has been great. I mean, we were part of a Newman community in outside of Rochester. So it was a self-standing Newman Center, which was the Catholic chapel for the State University College of New York at Brockport. And so that was where we had really been most of our adult lives. We got married there. Our daughter was married there. I mean, so much of the community. And it was a very vibrant but small community. And so when we moved to Portland, really weren't finding that same kind of
Mm-hmm.
environment in our first couple months. But then we, certainly a very long story, but we landed at a small Newman chapel that was part of PSU, Portland State University. And then that led us to first St. Patrick's and then St. Michael's, and this community of faith where we're led by the St. John's Society priests that really help us bring faith formation to our forefront and have been involved in community projects. And it's really been a gift of this new faith community that is absolutely amazing and is so much a part of my life now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just things, sometimes I think we think about our what everything has the effect that's on us, but we don't always think about maybe God places you there for certain people so
Uh,
that your impact is, you know, for those being what they need at the time.
oh, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Like my daughter.
Like your daughter. Should we talk about that?
Let's talk about that.
So before she was Sister Mercy, she was Sydney Johnson, and Sydney, the 7 p.m. Mass at St. Michael the Archangel is known for its vibrance, usually totally full with beautiful Christian worship music and a very beautiful atmosphere with a lot of young adults and some seasoned adults as well. And so as that was the Mass was my go-to, I would sit traditionally in the second row of chairs, and there was always this young lady in the first row of chairs. And she was always very prayerful and just always present. You could tell she was present with Jesus in her prayers. Well, then over time, we were involved in the same programs together. And so I got to meet Sydney and learned that she was a nurse. And then COVID times came. And so as we were both sharing our COVID stories and COVID stresses, we again kind of bonded over time. And then there's a couple other stories that are pretty neat. And one story is there's a small book called the Magnificat. And it's a book that has the daily readings of the Mass, as well as interpretations and stories about saints. I had never really been exposed to it. Well, Sydney, who sat in front of me, always had one. And so that really piqued my interest of what this book really contained and then how prayerful. So I, of course, subscribed as well. And so over time, then with the programs we were involved in, and then as she discerned to join the Servidoras and, really became her prayer partner, her prayer warrior for her entering and staying connected through various ways and through mom, we've just been gifted with this friendship that's about faith. And she would call me her at St. Michael's mom, certainly not her mom. But it was a very special, endearing term that was what I served. That was our connection. And so I feel very graced by learning so much about her commitment to Jesus, and then just seeing her joy in her visits and her letters of she is serving as the wife of Christ. And it's just absolutely touching and just very inspiring. So that's my Sister Mercy story, and how grateful I am to be a small part of her life and her prayer warrior.
Yeah, and I think that part of her being where she is to be there for other people, as an influence as well, you know,
Yeah.
just because of who she is, she
Mm-hmm.
has that special thing. And it's interesting that none of the kids in my family were surprised that that was the direction she would take, because you could see just certain things about how her relationship with Jesus is,
Mm-hmm.
all along. And it just, it wasn't totally what we wanted for her. But that's, I am more and more coming to see that she's exactly where she's supposed to be.
Yeah. And it's a big sacrifice for families, for other parents that I know whose, children have either moved to the priesthood or to the religious life. It is a sacrifice, but you realize that you are giving part of yourself to Jesus in order for them to minister to so many people. So we appreciate you as parents to be able to provide that opportunity for Sister Mercy.
Yeah, 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 it's pretty cool. So you were you a speaker at some time too? For what kind of speaking for what?
So in my nursing career, I was very grateful that along my critical care years, a bulk of my nursing was a critical care nurse. And so I became involved in the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. And through AACN, we formed a chapter in Rochester because there hadn't been one. And so that was really the springboard to learning more about not only nursing care and nursing process, but then also learning that I had an associate's degree, which is awesome as a registered nurse, but I also realized that for me to grow in my profession, I needed to advance my career. So I did go back to school when our daughter was young, and I ended up getting my master's degree, and I had a clinical nurse specialist and nurse practitioner. So in that, as I grew in my nursing career, I also grew for professional development, and I was given amazing opportunities by networking and mentoring through AACN and other organizations, but primarily AACN. So I became a leader, and I was an elected leader for 5 years. I was on our national board, and I was on our certification board. And those opportunities led to me being able to speak at conferences and just be able to influence. When I sat in audiences, I would think, wow, I'm really influenced by this speaker. And so I realized that if I had knowledge to share about the areas that were my expertise, and it was mentoring, and then more about pulmonary, I was a pulmonary nurse practitioner. I took care of people who had breathing problems and needed ventilators. And so sharing that expertise. So I was given truly the gift of being able to get invited to audiences where I had conferences around the country, and being able to share that expertise. In my last 10 years, I focused more on pressure injury prevention. So as a nurse, we want to make sure that your skin stays without any sores. So my last 10 years, I worked with 8 hospitals to bring teams together around preventing that next injury to you while I'm taking care of you. And so that also led to many opportunities where I was able to present. And then also I have published quite a number of articles that have been in nursing journals and edited a book. And, again, just finding a way to influence and bring along our caregivers to be able to give good care to patients. And so that was something to give up, to realize that I was an expert in my field, or as an expert as I could be.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I retired, that wasn't how I was defining myself as Margaret the speaker, Margaret the nurse leader, Margaret the nurse practitioner, the CNS. But who I am now is, that's my background. That's absolutely a gift, but it's now how I can share Christ's joy in the work that I do, and bring it in a different way, and bring my skill sets and my charisms to the work that I'm doing with, again, church and family and organizations.
Yeah, and I've thought about that before too, as to all the things that I did in my work life, and how they translated into, what I'm doing now. And there is a lot of carryover in that. I've also thought about all the things that I did in my life as to how I influenced my children. And then as you hear Sister Mercy talking about her students and how in love she is with them and the games
Right.
they're playing, whatever, I mean, that was, you know, I was influential in some part of that in her
Yeah.
growing up doing those things, that kind of thing too. So it is interesting, just kind of that ripple effect
Yeah.
of things. Yeah.
Planting, and it's planting the seed. It's
Mm,
planting the seed, watching it grow, and then helping it nurture along the way.
exactly.
One of my first projects when I was in my master's program was looking at the effects of mentoring on critical care nurses when nurses are new to the profession or new to critical care. And that, it's hard to know at that time how much that was really going to influence my career 20 plus years going forward. And thinking about how grateful I am that that was a gift and a charism, and helping so many young nurses find their potential and work through that. When I had one of my last public speaking opportunities was at the chapter I'd already just mentioned in AACN, Critical Care Nurses in Rochester. I was invited back for the anniversary of the chapter's founding. And so in that, it was wonderful to reflect in that community how many people who had been staff nurses are now chief nurses, are professors, are advanced practice nurses. And so it is a gratifying feeling to know that I had a small part of their growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I love that. So, separate subject, you visited the Holy Land?
I did. In,
Tell us
tw-
about
20,
that.
in 2023, there were a group of 43 pilgrims that went from our St. Michael's community, as well as the community in Corvallis, which is our sister facility, sister church. It's St. Mary's. So it was led by our pastor, Father Ignacio, and we were on a Catholic travel group, and we spent, I think it was a total of 12 days that we toured uh, the Sea of Galilee, Nazareth, all of the high points, and certainly ending up in Jerusalem.
Mhm.
And it was very much a beautiful guided tour by a local. He was a gentleman who'd grown up in Bethlehem, and so he just had such rich history to share, as well as his own personal faith. Those days were just so amazing in terms of our itinerary of seeing the places that Jesus was with his disciples and Mary. And all of them were prayerful. We had masses every day. We prayed the rosary, and it was a very prayerful experience. I think the thing I came away with is everywhere we went, it was great to know that Jesus had just been there 2,000 years ago. But
Yeah.
he's with me. He's not here anymore. When we went to the Transfiguration Chapel, and that was dramatic to think that that's where the transfiguration of our Lord happened. And it was powerful being there and celebrating the Mass together. And again, he wasn't there with the bright light, but the bright light went into my heart. And so when I hear the Transfiguration stories, and we just celebrated the Feast of the Transfiguration, it brings it just so much more personal for me. And on the Sea of Galilee, we went out on the boat in the sea and thinking about that's where Jesus preached to the gospel, to the apostle. He isn't there, but I was there. And so being able to experience that. And I think that's what I've continued, the Mount of Beatitudes and so on. I mean, there's every place that we went had just such rich meaning. And I carry it with me, as well as other pilgrims that we've talked, when we exchange, is that you don't read the gospel, you don't hear these stories in the same way because they touch us so much more. And just so grateful that that I had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, yeah, but you're right. I mean, it does enrich you because you have in mind the actual things that we're seeing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
not totally because it's a different era, right? But even still, to see the landscape, to see all of that. But yeah, that's the wonderful thing of the Holy Spirit being right inside of you all the time, so it doesn't matter where you are, he's there within reach as a
Right.
real relational being.
Yeah, yeah. And the Holy Land pilgrimage was also the spot where was the first time that I really brought my head around the potential of retirement. Because my husband and I had talked about that and what would be the right timing and what would that look like. And I think that being on the Sea of Galilee and reflecting and it really gave me time to pause to think about this is trusting. It's trusting in Jesus that he has it. He has this. And so I just need to be able to trust that the saying yes and the next steps will all fall into place when I trust that to happen and have the Holy Spirit open my heart.
Hmm. Yeah, trust. That's a big, that's an underline. I think that's our foundational word is trusting and really knowing, and you get that through reading more scriptures and being closer, to understanding who he really is. He doesn't let anybody down. He's got the big picture figured out and he is there. It's just sometimes what we see doesn't match up with what we believe, or what we think it's supposed to look like at the time.
Right. It's not Margaret's will be done, it's thy will be done. Oh yeah, that's right.
Exactly. 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 Well, we are almost out of time. What would you like to leave our listeners with?
Well, one of the things, not to be like selfishly promoting, but is I've been involved more with our parish at St. Michael the Archangel, and I'd mentioned before, our priest of the St. John Society. I've been asked to lead several programs, and one program that might be an interest to potential, listeners is we have generally quarterly we have theological academy, and most of our sessions have been online, and they're snapshots. So we've had speakers that have had programs 4 weeks in a row, 3 to 4 weeks in a row, hour-ish sessions, and we Zoom people together, and the speaker talks about a topic. Like an example of a topic was, we had a speaker talk about our Blessed Virgin Mary, and she just gave us an amazing amount of depth around it. Last year we had a session, 4 sessions on St. John Henry Newman, who's now a doctor of the church. So there's a variety. We had a Lenten series. So in the fall, we're going to have one called The Last Four Things, which is, around, how we look at end of life, but also how we focus around those last four things and make them the most of our lives now. So that's going to be in October. So I would look for, we're just working on our promotional materials. It's a nominal fee of $10, but we look for people who are just looking for expanding their faith. And there's no tests, there's no exams. It's really about joining and then we record them so that people who are registered have the opportunity to go back to them. So it's an opportunity I just wanted to share with listeners that might not be right in the Portland metro area.
Yeah. So that's something you could give me information for, and
I
I
will.
can
I can.
put it in
Sure.
the show notes for people if they're
Okay.
interested. So
Great.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Jan. I appreciate it.
From the day we're born, we begin a journey. It will be molded by our families, our environments, our beliefs, and motivations. God, as the Alpha and Omega, is with us each step of the way, whether we follow Him or not. Just as we have our own personal journeys, each character in the Bible has theirs. Each have had their own lessons to learn. And higher than that, God has used each one in His ultimate plan. Discovering your journey, finding God in every step, is an interactive 6-week study that melds the two together. We begin by mapping the journey of our lives leading up to who we are today. Each week, we will dig deep into the lessons God taught the characters of Ruth, Joseph, Jonah, and David, and compare them to our own journeys as we find where God has been in each step of the way. Discovering your journey, finding God in every step includes a study book, a journal, and videos of my own personal stories.